So my presentation today is on finding inspiration for game design everywhere you look. I've got a nice little graphic up here. Okay, any questions? So there's my presentation, guys. Questions. Let's go ahead and look through these guys. So basically what we're after, this is sort of the long babble about this, but what we're basically after today, what I want to talk about is looking for inspiration for game design, looking for that raw inspiration for new titles, for new brands, etc., and just trying to figure out where we can get that stuff from. There's a great book by a guy named Jesse Schell. I don't know if anyone's ever read this, but The Art of Game Design. It remains one of my favorite books on game design to date. There's no information about programming in it. It's all literally about the philosophies and psychologies of what make players tick, what make them play games, why do people find games entertaining. And one of the things he talks about is he says a game is a problem-solving activity approached with a playful attitude. And I think that's a really great definition of a lot of games out there. If you think about a lot of games, what you're basically trying to do is you're trying to get players to accomplish some sort of a task, almost like going to work, but they're doing it with a playful attitude, and there's an element of fun involved. And one of the examples he uses that I think is great is from Mary Poppins' Spoonful of Sugar. She says, in every job that must be done, there is an element of fun. You find the fun and snap, the job's a game. So really cool stuff right there from Mary Poppins. So Jesse breaks down, he talks about what are the elements of game design, and I don't think this is concrete, but this is his interpretation. He talks about mechanics, so basically everything that goes into the functioning and mechanics of the game, how it's played. Story, so whatever narrative or backstory is driving the game. Aesthetics, so the art style, the sound, etc. And the technology, which I think in today's day and age really means what sort of platform are you going to be shipping? Are you going mobile? Are you using consoles? Are you using Oculus Rift for Facebook? So he breaks it down to these different categories. This is a cool exhibit from the London Design Museum, the Endless Stairs. And one of the things that Jesse talks about is he says design principles will come from everywhere because design is everywhere. So really ideas for games are all around us. What we really have to do is we have to trick ourselves into opening up a good part of our subconscious to receive that. So how do we open ourselves up to receive that inspiration? And what I want to do with you guys today is talk about some tips and tricks that I think are really good for sort of opening ourselves up to receiving information about that. So just sort of a broad dive on some of the categories I'll be talking about. Opening up the subconscious, creating problem statements, observing and documenting, breaking out of habitual sensory input routines to stimulate creative neuroplasticity. It's my fanciest line of the day. Creating random constraints. I'm a huge fan of this. Finding order out of chaos. Visiting cool websites is obviously pretty cool. We all do that. And then observing and participating in life outside of games, which I really think is critical as game developers that we do that. So opening up the subconscious. Quiet reflection. I think this is one of the most underused techniques for developing anything, and it's really amazing how many people do not like to do this. It was a study done by the University of Virginia where they took a bunch of adult males and they put them in a room where there was no sensory input, there was no music, no visual input. It was a white room with soundproof walls. The only thing these guys could do, the people who were in the experiment, was they could shock themselves electrically. And so what they found was that most people would actually shock themselves electrically than be alone with their own thoughts. And I think that's really it's shocking, no pun intended, but I think we need to get past that. I think we need to get back to a period of quiet reflection, meditative, thinking about, literally just sitting there and think with no stimulation. A lot of times you can get great ideas from that. Writing down your ideas or verbally recording them is great. I find writing on paper, I'm sure everyone who's involved in tech will hate me for saying that, but I think there's something really visceral about writing an idea down on paper with an actual pen, connects you to the real world. It's a very powerful experience. Talking to yourself. People will think you're crazy, but this is a great way to sort of open up the subconscious. If you talk to yourself in the shower, whatever, you will start verbalizing things that you probably won't normally think of. So this is a very good technique. Nap. You got to get sleep. A lot of people in the game community do not sleep. I think napping is a great way to refresh the brain, refresh the subconscious. Terrific technique. So definitely make sure you're getting your sleep. Eavesdrop. I do this all the time. Whenever I go out with my wife to restaurants and we have a lull in the conversation, which is pretty rare because we like to talk to each other, I start listening to what other people are saying at other tables. And what's really interesting is in today's day and age, people broadcast every aspect of their lives. I've heard so many people in this hotel on cell phones at maximum volume talking to their friend, and it's like, I can hear every detail of your personal life. I can get game ideas from that, okay? focus and meditate about something really cool, then do some other unrelated tasks, see what develops. I really like this one. I've done this with game design students before, where I get them to really think about a type of game they make or think about a genre of game they really, really like, and then focus on some other activity. Focus on just doing like math exercises or doing some chores. And what happens is the subconscious will naturally start developing ideas as a result of that because you're occupying your conscious brain with a different task. Doodle. This is just a gold mine right here, especially while you're doing something else or talking to someone. If you're on the phone with someone, break out a pad of paper and start doodling and pay attention to the conversation. Don't lax on that. It's amazing what your subconscious will come up with when you force your conscious brain to work on some other activity. Your subconscious just goes wild. Last one there is love the process. If you don't love what you're doing, it's going to be hard for your subconscious to really open up and accept these things and be willing to accept these things. Next one is create problem statements. Okay, so if we don't know the goal we're shooting for, if that's ambiguous, it's really hard to get inspired. So one of the advantages of a problem statement is it forces you to have a very focused, creative space. You can be very, very creative, but you know exactly what you're going for. It provides a measurement of success. So if you have a problem statement, you have a goal you're trying to achieve, you can then look at the metrics, you can look at the results of that and compare that to your measurement initially. It's better communication. So if you have a problem statement, it's better communication amongst your team. And it creates immediate constraints. And I think constraints are such a key to really having good creative results on anything you do. If you just sit down and you say, I'm going to make a game about anything, you're not going to make a game about anything because you don't have any constraints. So you have to set some constraints. Problem statements can definitely help with that. Observe and document. So really quickly, just go through here. Visit online video sites. I'm going to talk about that in a second. Watch sports, especially obscure ones. Watch movies. Observe your daily challenges. Look at maps and go to museums. Yeah, these guys are crazy. I don't know if anyone's familiar with these. They're called Russian roofers. So there's this hobby that kids have in Russia where they climb these buildings that are insanely tall or bridges, and they do it without any climbing equipment whatsoever. It's pretty crazy stuff. So visit online video sites. Witness things you are too scared to do but think are awesome. So Russian climbing videos are crazy. There's this video you can look up of the Shanghai Tower climb. These Russian kids go to China, and they break into this skyscraper under construction. They climb all the way to the top, and they climb out on a crane, and it's insane. And they record the whole thing through a GoPro. That's pretty much Mirror's Edge right there. I mean, you could get so many game ideas just from that. It's ridiculous. Basically, this gets you to kind of do things you're scared of, but you can do it in a risk-free environment. Okay. Hopefully, I'm not going too fast. Watch sports, especially obscure ones. Underwater hockey. Who knew? You can actually, if you live in San Francisco, you can actually play this in the Presidio. I actually tried this. This is ridiculously hard. If you are not in like amazing shape, you will be out of breath in no time. Watch sports, especially obscure ones. Sports contain interesting motion dynamics, and they have rule systems like 3 strikes that could be extrapolated into 3 lives into video games. So a lot of good things you can get, even just putting those on in the background while you work can be a lot of fun. Watch movies. It's Groundhog Day. Groundhog Day is basically what I like to consider a living, breathing, cinematic game design document. Okay, I do this exercise with some game design classes that I teach. I tell them to watch a movie and analyze the problem the main character is going through, find the rules of the game, and reverse engineer a game design document based on it. I've gotten some really killer results from some of my classes who have done that. I really think most movies, most really good stories are really about characters solving problems anyway. Whether or not they succeed or fail is up to the director and the creator of the movie, but this is a really fun exercise to do, is to just pick out movies you really like and reverse engineer them. Okay. Observe your daily challenges. I love this. Groceries. Only take 1 trip, right? Depends how ambitious you are. There's a game right there. What problems you face in your daily life? So one of the problems I face is getting my 3-year-old daughter dressed for preschool. So the other day I was sitting there thinking, if I went into Unity and I created a mech anim skeleton and then I hooked up a rag doll to it and we put some touch controls and did some like really light cloth work, I could have a game about the little 3-year-old who likes to wiggle all over the place, and the object of the game is to get her dressed. That could actually be really fun. So looking at your daily challenges in life can be a really good inspiration for finding ideas for games. Look at maps. This is really fun. Here's one of California as an island. My wife used to work at an antique gallery, and they got this map in one day. I'd never seen anything like this before, but apparently there's a whole series of maps out there that were commissioned by royalty, by kingdoms, that actually depict California as an island. What's really interesting about them is a lot of times when they found out that California wasn't an island, some of the maps were changed in an attempt to sort of deceive other countries or keep information from them. But looking at maps is a great way to go. You can construct stories and game mechanics based on them. And in fact, Robert Louis Stevenson, apparently his nephew one day asked him to draw him a map. And what emerged was the story Treasure Island. So he got inspiration just from drawing a map. I think maps are really cool because they get you to think about location and travel and movement of people, and you can get some really interesting ideas just from those guys. Okay. Go to art museums. Yeah, these are fun. Modern art, especially performances and happenings, share many qualities with games. I would say most of the stuff that's happened in the modern art world probably after the 1950s, shares a lot of characteristics with games. So right here you see, this is Matthew Barney, and he is participating in a piece of art called Drawing Restraint. And so the idea behind this piece was Matthew hooked himself up to all these various levers and pulleys that were attached to weights, and the idea here was for him to create a drawing. And the challenge was he had to overcome all these different obstacles and weights. So the drawings he makes are very, very basic, but it's really the process that he goes through in creating these things. Some of these are actually ridiculous. If you go to SF MoMA, it's closed right now, but they used to have one of his pieces on one of the walls, and he literally had to hang himself by like some climbing harness upside down to draw these things. So you could do a drawing game or a painting game where you have to you have some Unity ragdoll and you're trying to get it to draw, and it's totally, hooked up to these harnesses. Some good stuff right there. There's a lot of stuff from the 60s and 70s that you could look at for really interesting game ideas. Go to science museums, okay? Hands-on exhibits. Already interactive. That's one problem already solved, okay? I can't tell you how many times I've been to the Exploratorium and seen things that would make a perfect game. And the great thing is you can kind of already play test them because you can touch them and feel them and experience them. A lot of these things have to do with physics, so everyone knows that people like physics games, Angry Birds, Flappy Bird, Where's My Water, those all have to deal with physics. So a lot of these experiments, a lot of these science museum things have to do with physics. It's already a huge win. And there's a ton of variety of sensory input that use all 5 senses. So that's another thing I like about science museums is that you can oftentimes not just see things and touch them and interact with them, but there's also often there's a sound element or maybe even an element of smell. Great, perfect, thank you. Okay, so science museums, lots of fun. Okay. Break out of habitual sensory input routines to stimulate neuroplasticity. Does everyone know what the term neuroplasticity means? Hopefully everyone's familiar with this. I forget who exactly came up with this, but it's basically the idea that as we get older, our brains get more rigid. Okay, but the idea is that our brains in actuality are very plastic. They're very moldable. So we can change our habits, we can change our thinking patterns if we put some effort into that, and we can actually change the physical structure of how our brain works. So some quick things here. Take a different route to work, make a daily task intentionally more challenging. We'll talk about all these things. Talk to random people, change the music you're listening to, make art, do something weird, play Fiasco, and play a game and change its rules, and do something you're scared of. So let's take a look at these. Taking a different route to work. My dad called me a couple of nights ago, and he said he was at work, and he was driving home, and he said, I was terrified the moment I got out of the car because I realized I had absolutely no recollection of driving my car home. He's like, literally the entire thing seemed to drive itself. I had no recollection of making a right turn here, left turn there. And it's not because he wasn't paying attention, it's because those things become habitual, they become routine, so we stop really actively thinking about those tasks. Take a different route from work. There's a great Lifehacker article on how taking a different commute route actually challenges your brain and actually provides mental stimuli that's not usually there if you're taking the same route over and over again. So obviously, time permitting, this can be a fun activity. Make a daily task intentionally more challenging by adding a physical or mental constraint. I have no idea what that child is trying to do. It looks like there's a combination of sweeping and toothbrushing the floor. But you could take a daily task that you do, and you can create a condition that, when satisfied, temporarily removes the constraint. So you can add a constraint to this. Try sweeping the floor with your feet. I know it sounds silly, but we're game designers, so we sort of we profit from things that are silly or different and entertaining. So really, this is a great way to go. It's just taking something you normally do and trying to find some way to make it more a little bit more restraining and a little more physically challenging, and then creating conditions like power-ups that remove those constraints for you. You can get some really nice ideas from this. And I've done this a couple of times with some of my game design students. Usually the results are pretty funny. Try a new sport, go to the symphony, eat in a new restaurant, do whatever you can to break up your habitual sensory stimuli. And that's, I think, one of the main things that prevents our subconscious from receiving a lot of that inspiration is we just get so used to seeing the same things all the time. So we don't really think about that, and we're not really receptive to things. Talk to random people. So, this is hard, especially in today's day and age. No one really likes to talk to each other anymore unless it's through some sort of messaging service. But this is a great way to get new information. There's people all over the place. Some people will look at you crazy if you try to strike up a conversation with them, but that's just sort of part of the challenge there. You can get a lot of inspiration from this. Change up the music you're listening to. Listen to country, classical, rap, bagpipes. Break it up, okay? A lot of people I know have particular tastes in music. They say, I don't like country, I don't like rap. Try it. Listen to it. You might get an idea from it. You're breaking up your sensory stimuli. You're breaking up your habitual input patterns. And your subconscious is going to be ready to receive new inspiration. You never know, okay? Make art. Here's the new Picasso right here, this little squirrel. Even if you're not an artist, do it anyway. Your screw-ups will turn into potential ideas for games. And I think one thing that's very interesting with art and games is that they both allow for risk-free experimentation zones. So, I can play Street Fighter and I can experiment with beating someone up in game. I don't really have any risks, right? I'm not going to really get physically injured. Art is sort of the same thing. You can experiment and there's really no risk aside from someone telling you your artwork sucks. But you just sort of have to open yourself up to that. So this is a great idea, even for people who aren't artists, even for programmers. I've worked on teams before where I've actually had programmers and engineers make art. And we've got some really interesting results and really interesting ideas from that. Do something weird in public. This is one of my favorite things to do. Here's John Cleese doing the Ministry of Silly Walks right here. Walk in a silly fashion, make silly faces, have someone else document the behavior and the results. I do this more times than I'm really proud to admit. I think this is actually a really fun activity. And the great thing is if someone catches you in the act, usually it makes them smile. So, hey, you're a game designer. You made someone laugh. You made someone smile. Good for you. Okay? But this can really open up some new ideas because, again, you're doing something out of the ordinary, you're breaking up your routine, and you might get some ideas from acting a little bit silly in public. Play Fiasco. Has anyone seen this game? Show of hands. Yeah, this is a really amazing game. This is a narrative construction game. There's really no winners or losers in this. You basically sit around with at least 3 other people, and you start rolling some dice, and you use the randomization factor of the dice to build a narrative. I like to when I'm sort of selling this game right now, but in the end, you sort of end up with a really warped Coen Brothers movie. So it's like Fargo on steroids. This is really great. You will get a lot of ideas for narratives, maybe for games, maybe for fiction, whatever, but it's a really great exercise, and again, it's breaking up that habitual input patterns. So here's another one. 5 minutes. Find an existing board game. Roll a 6-sided dice, return X value, change X rules of the game, play and document. I do this with game design students a lot. Get Parcheesi, roll a dice. If it lands on a 2, change 2 rules. See what happens when you play the game. Okay. Do something you're scared of. Whitewater rafting, right? Breaks up habitual sensory input patterns. Really good. Create random constraints. These are fun. So these are some exercises you can actually do with your team, or if you're a lone developer, you can do them by yourself. So let's go through them. Random values are your friend. Use some type of number or state, randomized, some type of random number whose outcome is tied to predefined tasks, questions, dice, deck of cards, etc. My example with this is come up with a list of 10 mechanics, come up with a list of 10 story ideas, list of 10 art ideas, roll 3 dice, and see what the numbers land on, and pick one from each category. You can get some really good stuff from that. Solitaire, same thing. You could do the same thing. You come up with 10 different mechanics, 10 art styles, 10 story ideas, 10 technology platforms, and then you could assign a suit to each category and start drawing cards. As soon as you have 4 suits, you've got a game idea. Okay. Secret Santa, this one's really fun. Take some of your favorite non-breakable items, such as action figures, toys, etc. Put them in a bag. Shake the bag gently and start pulling objects out. Once you have 3 or 4 objects, you may have some inspiration. Again, you're breaking up the subconscious. You probably would not do this on your own, but if you do a little game here, it's kind of fun. Jigsaw medley. Build a jigsaw puzzle on the back of the pieces. Write down random mechanics, aesthetic styles, and story elements. Start turning the pieces back over so you can't see what you've written, and piecing the puzzles together. And when you start getting like 4- and 5-part islands, turn them back over and see what combinations you've created. Okay. Morning routine. Take a bunch of ideas for mechanics, stories, and art styles, and randomly put one in a different envelope. So you have 3 envelopes. Seal them, and then put them in different locations of your house that you go through during your morning routine. I did this with a game design class. They came to class, and they're like, we came with like 6 or 7 new ideas. We have one idea from what came in the envelopes, but we dreamt about like 5 or 6 different ideas because our brains couldn't stop racing, thinking about what was inside the envelopes. Okay, and then crowdsource. Use Facebook, Twitter, etc. to help generate lists of random things, mechanics, artists, movements, etc. Order out of chaos. So there's a lot of really neat tools on here. Random color scheme generator, random Google Street Views, random music generators. There's geocone.net in-browser sacred geometry generator. You go here and you type like hexagons, 6 of them, whatever, and it just starts making these animated patterns. You can get a ton of ideas from that. Alchemy.org is really cool. It's a drawing program. You can just start drawing on with minimal mouse input, and it'll start creating these things that look like Rorschach tests, which are super, super cool. And then this is really fun, a cool website game. Write down like 6 of your favorite websites, roll a 6-sided dice, whatever the number comes up, pick that website, roll it again, and then whatever number comes up, go to that number in the posting. So if you get a 2, go to the second post, and then sit down and take 10 minutes to create a story about a fictional event, character, etc., related to the content. Okay. The last one is observe and participate in life outside of games, and I think this is really critical. It gets you to enjoy life. It gets you to look at other areas of life and other aspects of life. But I think there's another reason that's really quite compelling, and this will probably be the wackiest thing I'm going to say all day. The concept of the holographic universe. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of this, but this is the idea that everything we're experiencing today, this entire world, may actually be a highly sophisticated video game running on a computer in the future. And I know this sounds crazy, but there are actually scientists at Harvard and Yale and MIT who have proposed this as actually being potentially not only possible, but maybe also a likelihood. Okay, so if that's the case, then we're living in Grand Theft Auto 33,000. There you can see a screenshot. Hopefully Rockstar doesn't sue me. Running on the PS 322. Okay, so if that's the case, we're literally living in a game of GTA, or maybe we are. So perhaps by looking for elements of game design, if this is the case, inside of the game of our existence, we can come to a better understanding of not only game designs, but of our own universe, and maybe even potentially what exists outside of that. And I think that's a lot of things that spirituality and religion have been trying to do for sort of thousands of years. So maybe the idea, if this all is a game, maybe that can sort of help us glean a little more understanding of our own world and how the universe works, in addition to giving us really cool ideas for games. So, yeah, so that's it. And Q&A if people want. Thank you.
Yep. I'll bring the mic to you. So, okay, go.
So one of my main questions is, I kind of missed the first half, so I don't know if you addressed it, but in using other cultural mythology as design ideas, such as maybe like some African for like Anasazi the spider. I'm sorry if I don't get that name correct, or things like that from other cultures.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I mean, if you look at Star Wars, George Lucas really pulled all of the, Star Wars is more mythology than science fiction in a lot of ways, and he actually worked with Joseph Campbell, who wrote The Power of Myth, and looked at a lot of cultures, a lot of ancient mythology, and pulled from that. I think that's a great idea for games, and I think a lot of what I was talking about is sort of how do we constrain ourselves to picking something from that, because with mythology you have so many different cultures and so many different stories out there, so maybe using some of those randomization elements and forcing, if you have if you roll a dice and you make 1 be Nordic, 2 be Greek and Roman, 3 be Egyptian, you can start developing new ideas that maybe you hadn't seen before. But I think using mythology is absolutely classic for storytelling, and I think also Joseph Campbell talks about how we have a responsibility as a society to recycle old stories. So really, games are a great venue for that. Yeah.
Anyone else? Don't be shy.
All right. Oh, he's
Yeah.
yeah.
So, also, what are your ideas on combining, say, as a design for certain games or whatever, combining both sci-fi and fantasy together along with that mythology to kind of make it more, I guess you could say, new and fresh?
If you're talking about merging sci-fi and fantasy together?
Yeah.
So I think there's been examples of that have worked pretty well in the past. One thing that stands out in my mind, and I'm going to date myself, is the American version of Final Fantasy III. I think in their narrative did a great job where they had magic tech, and so they had this element of magic that was very ancient, but they also had a very high technology. I almost think that sort of in a lot of ways sort of drove the steampunk. The development of steampunk. That was really one of the first Super Nintendo games and video games to really have a lot of steampunk in there. So I think it definitely works. But again, I think it's sort of how do you pick from that, and how do you use elements that are new? I think you have to balance that to a certain degree with elements that are already familiar with the player. But I think there's definitely been great success. It's a fun thing. I remember when I first played FF3, I was really entranced by that aspect of having both magic and also technology and sort of fused together. And I think it led for a very interesting storyline.